Okay, this is a brief video for In-Class Lab 6. I'm not feeling so well, so I hope this goes okay. The idea of In-Class Lab 6, if you look at the PDF, let me see if I can get it. Well, I don't have it up. Let me see if I can get it to come up here. There it is that you're to use a series of nested for loops to build a dynamic matrix of characters. And as you see here, you have to get some input from the user for the maximum number of rows and columns and store these in predefined variables, which I've already given you. And it has to be between 1 and 26. And these are validation loops that you've already done, so I'm not going to go over that because you did this in, I believe we did it, the first time we did it was in the Fibonacci series project or effort that we did. And here you get input and validate it between 1 and 25, and then you, like here, they give you a 5 by 7, and so we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 columns, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 rows, and then you just output. The output's easy enough. So there's your beginning code, and you can look at that, and you can also pause the video. I've already done that much in here, but let me go to a Word document and let's kind of look at this. Columns are vertical and rows are horizontal. So our job here is to make sure we put a character in each one of these intersecting cells, like Excel. You might think of it like that. So all of your columns and rows start with 0, and there are 3 columns in this example and 3 rows. Now notice we go 0, 1, and 2. This is what we're going to be doing when we get into arrays. That's why I'm using the example now, so you can kind of get used to it. But you always start off with 0, and these are called indices. All right. So this is index 1, 0, index 1, index 2. Now there are 3 columns, but since we start with a 0, 0 is a number, so it's always the highest index of your last column or row is always 1 less than the total number of elements. So if I've got 1, 2, 3 columns, then my highest index is 3 minus 1, or 2. And the same here. If I've got 3 rows, let me stop this. If I've got 3 rows, then my highest index for the highest row index is 2, 1 less than 3. I got 1, 2, 3, so 3 minus 1 is 2. And that's kind of the way you work with arrays. Now, our job here is to figure out a way to put a character in each one of these cells here, if you will. And the way we do that using nested loops is what we call row major order, these being rows. And what that means is we're going to look at the row first, and then for every row we're going to examine so many number of columns in that given row. All right. So for row 0, we're going to look at columns 0, 1, and 2, and then we're going to start over in the next row. So let's go ahead and just do that real quick. I'm going to put an @ sign here. And then we go to the next row, which is 1, and then we're going to examine each column again for row 1. So basically you're starting over with your columns, and you're incrementing your rows by 1. So then we'll do column 0, 1, and 2, and then we start on row 2, and then we do column 0, 1, and 2 until we get all the characters in there. And that's like it's almost like a Cartesian coordinate system. If you were to look at this, you would say, okay, at what cell is this particular character located? Well, it would be row 0, comma, column 0. And this one would be at row 0, column 1. Well, how does that play into the loops? Well, if you think about a loop control variable, what it really is an integer, and it's incrementing by 1. So if I have an integer, let's say my loop control variable is x, all right, and I've got num x equal 0. Let's say that's going to be one of my variables, all right. Every time, and let's say I use a for loop for that, and I've got x equals 0, and then the logic's going to be x less than 3, because there is no, so that would give me 0 to 2, and then x equals x. Well, let's just use step 1 because that's what a for loop uses in visual logic. So that increments by 1 every time, right? So every time this thing loops, the value for x increments by 1. So let's just set up x here. So x starts out at 0, right? And then is x less than 3? Yeah, it's 0. So then it comes up here and increments by 1. So now what is x? X is value of 1. It comes up here. It tests this. Is this correct? Yeah, because now x is 2, right? And now it increments by 1, tests it again. Now x is 3, so this is false, and the loop ends. All right, so there are the values that we had for our loop control variable. Now notice how these align nicely with what we're doing here. Okay, so that will enable us to use a loop to do this because of the way these rows and columns line up. All right, now that works great, except for the fact that, and we can programmatically set our loops up so that we're moving from rows and columns and so forth. The caveat to all this is we're going to be using dynamic string creation. And in order to make the display jump down to the next row, we're going to have to do something more than just change variables. We're going to have to input or embed in the output string a control character that will cause, when rendered, the display card or printer to actually jump to a new line. And I'm going to show you how to do that in a minute. So that's a little caveat. But the whole key to this thing, if you go back and look at the PDF, is that we're going to be building this whole thing programmatically, dynamically, based on user input. So they made the first run, they may give us a 2 and a 2, so we'll have 4 characters in there. Next run, they may give us a 7 and a 5. They can give us any series of numbers for rows and columns between 1 and 25. And we have to be able to build this dynamically based on what they give us. All right, we can't do that. We have to do that inside of our loops. Okay, and that's the whole key to this thing, because all we're doing here is, I mean, there's some trivial text at the bottom, and then we're going to output that string output variable. All right. Well, let's get to looking at that. So I'm going to use, according to the PDF, we're supposed to use 2 for loops. Oh, let's see. If I have to pause this video, that's, I'll just have to do it and come back to it. Hopefully it'll be all right. My brain's not working. For loop. All right, so I need a for loop inside of a for loop. Nested loops. This outermost loop is going to look, and if you go back here, you'll see for every row, we're going to do some number of columns. This is called row major order. That being the case, our rows will be the outermost loop. This is very common for traversing 2-dimensional arrays. And I'm just going to call this row. I won't even declare it except within here. Our initial value for the first row is always going to be 0. The final value is going to be set by the user. And where are we storing that? Well, we're storing it in the max number of rows they give us. I row max. All right, and the step is 1. Here we're going to do our columns. Okay, so for every row here, we're going to do some number of columns. So what happens is, when we fall into this and it starts, as soon as it goes inside here, it hits this loop and finishes doing all the columns before it ever comes back up and increments the row. So that's how for every row you can do some number of columns, because this sort of is held in suspended animation or in abeyance while this is looping. Okay, so that's how that works. This comes in, sets this counter at 0, comes in here and hits this column loop, loops through all the columns, does its thing, and it comes back up here and increments row by 1. Then it moves to row 1. Then this starts over again at 0 and goes 0, 1, 2. Then this becomes 2. Comes in here. This starts over again at 0, 1, and 2. Then we're done. Okay, if it were 2 and 2. That's how that works. You have to understand that this becomes sort of in suspended animation once it gets inside of here until this finishes, and then it increments that and starts this over again. Okay. All right, so we'll do column, initial value of 0, and this is the variable that we're getting from the user, I call max. Remember that? So now I've got all this set up. Now the key is here, first of all, for us to set up a way to build a string dynamically, and you know how to do that using the ampersand concatenation character, right? So I can start off, in fact, there's nothing in here, so once I come in here, I'm going to put my first character in there, and then when I come back, I'm going to stick my second one in there, my third one in there. So I have to do an ampersand to append that character every time to it, right? and I put an O in here instead of a 0, that ain't going to work. All right. Now, let's back away from this for a minute, and let me show you how to do this control character. And then, by the way, CRLF stands for Carriage Return Line Feed, and that comes from the old typewriters where you used to have the manual. When you hear the bell ring, you'd pull the lever, and what that would do is it would pull the carriage all the way back and then advance the line 1 or 2 lines, whatever you had it set for, so that hence the phrase Carriage Return Line Feed. All right, the easiest way to do this is to come into Notepad, and if you don't find Notepad, you can find it under Accessories, or you can just type it in. Don't use Notepad++. You want to use Notepad. All right, and it's in it under Accessories, or you can just come over here, go into your search pane, and type Notepad. And on these lab computers, we have both of these. That's HTML. You want that one. This is just a plain text editor. That's all it is. Now notice the cursor setting up there at the top. When I hit the Enter key, it advances the line feed 1 row. See it down there at that end? All right, now you might want to make notes about this, but what you want to do is select that hidden character, and to do that you can use Control+A on the keyboard. That's select all. All right, so Control+A, then Control+C to copy what you've just selected, because you can't see the selection. All right, so Control+A, Control+C after you hit Enter. Come back in here to CRLF, put your cursor between those 2 quotes, and paste. And when you do that, you'll see what happens here. You've pasted that carriage return line feed in there. So when I embed this into my output string, whenever the display device, whether it be a printer or the screen or whatever, the graphics card, sees that, it will actually do a carriage return line feed and start a new row, because all we're doing is numerically starting a new row. We're not telling this. I mean, if you look at the string that we build, if you just actually look at it, it's one huge long string with that character embedded in it. In fact, I might show you that in a minute. So for every row, we're going to put a character in at every column. So see that? So we're going to start off at row 0, because our row counter control variable will equal 0. And then it'll go into our column loop, which is the innermost loop, and it'll put a character in here, right? So what we're going to do is start off with output string with nothing in it, and then we're going to add that, and then we're going to add that, so we have these 2, and then we're going to add that, so we have these 3, right? And then that'll complete the first set of loops for the columns, and then it will increment the row. Well, that does nothing for the characters in the string. I mean, it's just going to be it's going to be 9, 3 times 3 is 9, so you'll have 9 @ symbols all back to back. And that's what you would see if you tried to output that, unless you put that character in there to do this. In fact, we'll do that in a minute, and I'll show you. All right, so we'll just kind of ignore this for now. All right, the way to do that is an assignment statement, right? So for every row, we're going to put an add in there. So it's, what I put, str output. And remember, you have to build on that. So you'll have to do str output equals str output, ampersand, and then mychar is where we have a constant that has our character in it, right? Okay. And that's going to give us a rows and a column. So I'm going to save this and run it, and I need to display. So I need just a single output statement. So when I get this thing built, all I'm going to have is that string name outputted to the screen, and everything should be in that. Okay. So let's try that and save it. See how it works. Maximum number of rows. Of course, validation. If I put 0, it's going to keep prompting me. So I'm just going to do 2 and 2. And so far I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. That's too many, isn't it? And plus they're all in line. Remember I told you that? Here's the problem. Remember I said that if the user says, okay, I want 2 columns, right? All right, excuse me, I want 3 columns, because that's 3 columns. Well, the highest index for that, since we're starting at 0, is 1 less than 3. And the same thing for the rows. So I've got to come in here and subtract 1 from that. Otherwise, I'll have too many. Okay. So it's going from 0 to I call max minus 1, or I row max minus 1, or the maximum number that they give me. So let's run that and see what it goes. So do 2 and 2. Now I've got 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's right. The only problem is there's nothing, to tell it to wrap the lines, because the way we're doing this, you would never be able to output it that way. You have to embed the carriage return line feed in there to do that. All right, now let's do that. And if you look at this, you'll see here, all right, row 0, I'm going to do 3 columns, 1, 2, 3, and then I'm wrapping to the next row. All right. Okay, so for every row, every time I finish my columns, I have to put that control character in there. So that's what I'm going to do. So this is my columns row loop, and this is where I'm going to put it. Actually, let me just do it like this. It's this with the CRLF in there. So instead of putting another character in there, I am going to put another character in there, but it's a carriage return line feed that I'm putting in there. All right. So save it, 2, 2, and there it is. See, 1, 2, 3, 4. And I could put another CRLF right here if I want, and I think I will, just so I get another row in there. So ampersand CRLF, ampersand, and that'll put my rows and columns down a little bit further. Okay. 2 and 2. Whoop, didn't like something I did. Let's go back and see what I did wrong. Oh, I got 2 ampersands in there. My fault. Sorry. Should pay attention to what I'm doing. I guess if I weren't sick, I would. That's my excuse. And there they are. See, I put an extra line in there. Now, if I do 15 and 15, it'll do 15 and 15. See that? If I do 1 and 1, it'll do 1 and 1. 1 by 1. 1 row, 1 column. That's 1 character. All right, that's basically the thing in a nutshell, and I'm hoping that you'll get most of this. And sorry I'm not able to lecture tonight, but I'm not feeling well. Anyway, or if you're my day class, this is just ancillary stuff. We've already talked about this in there. All right, well, have a good one. I will see you at the next class.